Welcome to Motherland Tales. We are so glad to have you here. Please subscribe to our channel and like and comment your favorite part of the story. Let's begin. Cynthia was a very gorgeous and beautiful young lady. Her beauty was so captivating that the men in her city were intimidated by her. Those who dared to come close were speechless in her presence. One day she met a man who loved her with his very life. He quickly married her and made her a high-class lady. But you see, life is fragile, and fate is unpredictable. Kenny was a man of power and influence, but even he was not immune to tragedy. One fateful day, he was involved in a fatal accident, and just like that, Cynthia's world came crashing down. The vibrant love she had with him was suddenly gone, and the mansion, once filled with laughter and joy, now stood as a hollow reminder of what was lost. Cynthia, devastated, was consumed by grief. She was beyond broken. Things took a sinister turn when her husband's family arrived. His relatives were not the supportive, grieving family she had hoped for. Instead, they were cold and distant, their eyes accusing, their words sharp. The moment they set foot in her home, Cynthia sensed something was wrong. One thing she did not know was that her husband's family had very strange practices that bordered on inhumane. Those practices were so terrible that they were oppressive to women who were grieving the loss of their loved one. It must have been something you did, something you withheld from him, they said. Or perhaps you cheated on him. You must have done something that took his life. You always have to blame the woman, don't you? She fired back. Their accusations, like poison, seeped into her fragile heart. She couldn't believe it. How could they think such terrible things about her? How could they accuse her of being responsible for her husband's death? She had loved him with all her heart. The accusations didn't stop there. They told her that to prove her innocence, she must undergo a horrific ritual. She was to cut her hair and drink the water used to bathe her husband's corpse. The very thought of it made her stomach churn. The demand was not only barbaric, but also dehumanizing. How could they ask her to perform such a vile act, especially while she was still in mourning? "Abomination!" Cynthia cried, her voice shaking with fury. "I will never allow you to strip me of my dignity like this. You cannot force me to perform such a disgusting act while I grieve for my beloved husband. Have you no compassion or humanity left in you?" Her in-laws stood unmoved, their faces hard with resolve. "This is tradition," the eldest one declared coldly. "It must be done if you are to prove your innocence." "I will never do it," Cynthia shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "How dare you ask me to humiliate myself in this way? How dare you make this about your cruel traditions instead of my sorrow?" She felt the weight of their cold hearts bearing down on her, the suffocating pressure of their accusation choking her. "Then you killed him!" they shouted at her, trying to intimidate her. But she just walked into her room and said nothing. As she stood in her room, crying and trying to make sense of everything that just happened, "I can make all of this go away." James, Kenny's younger brother, said with a sly grin as he walked into her room, his eyes gleaming with hunger. "If you let me have you, Cynthia, everything will be forgiven. I've always wanted you. I've always been jealous of my brother for having you, but now he's gone, and I want to own you. Your body, your mind, everything." Cynthia was stunned, her heart racing with disgust. Whack! She slapped him with all her strength, the sound of the impact echoing through the room. "How dare you disrespect me and dishonor your brother before he is even put in his grave?" "Get out!" she yelled. James staggered back, his face reddened with rage and humiliation. "Fine," he spat, his eyes narrowing, "then I will make your life so miserable you won't know what hit you." With that, he turned and left. Cynthia collapsed onto the floor, her heart heavy with grief, her mind reeling with the cruelty of her in-laws and the perverse proposition from James. She cried, deep, racking sobs that tore at her very soul. "Why? Why did you have to leave me, Kenny? Why do I have to endure this torment?" she wailed, her tears staining the floor beneath her. With that, she drifted into a troubled sleep on the cold, hard floor. The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains, its warmth doing little to soothe Cynthia's frayed nerves. She sat in the living room, rocking one of her twin babies while the other lay in a bassinet nearby. Her thoughts were a swirling storm of grief and fear, her heart aching for Kenny and dreading the battles she faced alone. A sharp knock at the door startled her. Before she could answer, the door creaked open, and her uncle-in-law, Chief Amos, strode in without invitation. He was a man of imposing stature, his presence as domineering as his voice. He wore a traditional agbada, its embroidered fabric a display of wealth and authority. Settling himself heavily on the couch, he cleared his throat. "Ahem," he began, his tone feigning concern. "Cynthia, my daughter, how are you? How are the children?" Cynthia shot him a glance, but said nothing, focusing on the baby in her arms. "I have come to reason with you, as grown-ups should," he continued, leaning back and crossing his legs. His voice dripped with feigned benevolence, but his eyes betrayed his true intentions. "You see, you are a very beautiful woman. You should not have to endure this kind of pain and stress. I can make all your troubles disappear." He paused, studying her face, as though searching for a flicker of agreement. Cynthia's expression remained stoic, her indifference masking the disgust building in her chest. "I can make the kinsman leave you alone," he said, his voice softer now, almost conspiratorial. "I can ensure no one forces you to observe those distasteful burial rites. I can provide for you and your children, give you security, give you a home." His words lingered in the air like an unwelcome guest. Cynthia continued to rock her child, refusing to look at him. "But," he said after a moment, leaning forward and lowering his voice, "there is something I will require in return." She froze, her hands tightening slightly around her baby. He smiled, his teeth gleaming. "You must become my second wife." The room seemed to shrink around her as his words sank in. He leaned back, his expression smug, as though he had just made her the offer of a lifetime. Cynthia's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with fury. "Get out," she said, her voice low but steady. Chief Amos raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "My dear, don't be hasty. Think carefully. I can protect you from the kinsman. If you refuse, I cannot guarantee your safety, or that of your children. We may have no choice but to force you to observe the rites, and as for your husband's properties..." He let the words hang in the air, his meaning clear. "Get out," Cynthia roared, her voice rising. Her trembling hand pointed to the door. "Leave before I do something I will regret." Chief Amos rose slowly, smoothing the front of his agbada. "Think about what I've said, my daughter," he said with a smile that made her skin crawl. "I am your best option. Don't let pride blind you." He walked to the door, pausing to glance back. "If you refuse, we will take all that belonged to Kenny, including those babies." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Cynthia trembling with rage and despair. She kissed her babies, her tears falling onto their soft cheeks. "What should I do?" she whispered to them as if expecting an answer. Her mind raced, searching for a way out of the tightening trap. "I must do something," she murmured. "These people, they will be the end of me." That night, Cynthia could barely sleep. She paced the house, her mind a whirlwind of fear and anger. Chief Amos's words played over and over in her head. The threat wasn't idle. She knew the family had the power to take everything from her if she didn't act. But what could she do? Where could she turn? As the clock struck midnight, a faint rustling outside caught her attention. Peering through the curtains, she spotted a figure moving in the shadows near her window. Her heart pounded as she clutched her baby monitor. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice shaking. The figure froze before darting away into the darkness. Cynthia's knees nearly buckled as she backed away from the window. Someone was watching her. Were they waiting for her to fall asleep? Was it one of her in-laws? Or had James returned to make good on his threat? The next day, a letter slipped under her door. It was written in bold, hurried handwriting. "Leave the house before it's too late. They won't stop until you are destroyed." Cynthia's blood ran cold. Who had written the letter, and what did they mean? Determined to uncover the truth, Cynthia decided to confront the family head-on. But first, she needed allies. A faint memory surfaced. Kenny had once mentioned a distant cousin, Abby, who had been ostracized for standing up to the family. If anyone could help her, it would be Abby. Cynthia packed a bag and made arrangements to leave the house that night. She wouldn't let herself be bullied into submission. Whatever secrets the family was hiding, she would uncover them, and she would protect her children at any cost. But as the darkness deepened, so did the danger. The more she learned about her husband's family, the more horrifying the truth became. they were hiding something far worse than outdated traditions. Something that would shatter everything Cynthia thought she knew about Kenny, his death, and the family that claimed to love him. That night, Cynthia prepared to leave under the cover of darkness. She wrapped her babies in warm blankets, their soft coos the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the house. She packed a small bag with essentials: diapers, formula, a few clothes, and the letter warning her to leave. Her heart raced as she tiptoed through the house, her nerves on edge. She had planned every detail, ensuring no one would hear her departure. But as she opened the front door, the sight of a shadowy figure standing at the gate froze her in place. The figure moved closer, the dim moonlight revealing a young man in his 20s, his face unfamiliar but his expression urgent. "Wait," he whispered, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You don't know me, but I'm here to help. My name is Emmanuel. I worked for your husband before he died. He was a good man, and I owe him my life. Please trust me." Cynthia hesitated, clutching her babies tightly. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Why should I believe you?" she demanded, her voice low but firm. "Because I know what the family is planning," Emmanuel said, stepping closer. "They want to strip you of everything. Chief Amos and James have already started forging documents to take over Kenny's assets. They'll claim you're unfit to care for the twins and take them too. If you stay here, they'll destroy you." Cynthia's breath hitched. The pieces were falling into place. The threats, the constant surveillance, the family's insistence on her compliance. It all pointed to a calculated effort to take everything from her. "I know someone who can protect you," Emmanuel continued. "Abby, she's not far from here. If anyone can stand up to the family, it's her." Cynthia's mind raced. She had planned to seek out Abby, but now it seemed Emmanuel might be her only chance of reaching her safely. She nodded slowly. "All right," she said, "but if this is a trick, you'll regret it." Emmanuel gave a solemn nod. "I wouldn't betray Kenny's memory. Let's go." The night air was heavy with tension as Cynthia and Emmanuel navigated the back streets, avoiding the main roads where they might be spotted. Emmanuel led the way, his movements swift and calculated, while Cynthia kept her babies close, their soft breathing giving her the strength to push forward. Hours later, they arrived at a modest house on the outskirts of the city. Emmanuel knocked on the door in a specific pattern, and moments later, a tall woman with fierce eyes and an air of defiance opened the door. "Abby," Emmanuel said quickly, "this is Cynthia, Kenny's wife. She needs your help." Abby's gaze softened as she looked at Cynthia, who was clearly exhausted but resolute. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "You're safe here." Over the next few days, Cynthia told Abby everything: the accusations, the threats, the letter, and Chief Amos's horrifying proposition. Abby listened quietly, her expression darkening with each word. "You're not the first," Abby said finally. "This family has been doing this for generations. Any woman who marries into their wealth is treated like property, and if her husband dies, they blame her to justify taking everything back. They hide it under the guise of tradition, but it's about control. That tradition is no longer being practiced in this community, but Kenny's family still holds on to it for their own selfish gain." Abby revealed that she had once been in Cynthia's position. She had fought back, but it had cost her everything: her home, her family, and nearly her life. "But I survived," she said firmly. "And so will you. They think they're untouchable, but they've made enemies over the years. I've been gathering evidence against them, waiting for the right moment to strike." Abby handed Cynthia a folder filled with documents: financial records, forged wills, and testimonies from other women who had suffered at the hands of the family. "This is enough to bring them down," Abby said, "but we'll need to be smart. They're powerful, and they won't go down without a fight." Before Cynthia could act, the family made their move. One evening, as Cynthia prepared dinner with Abby, there was a loud bang at the door. Several men, led by Chief Amos and James, stormed into the house. "You think you can hide from us?" Amos sneered, his eyes cold. "You're coming back with us, Cynthia, and if you don't comply, we'll take those babies by force." Abby stepped forward, her voice steady. "You're trespassing, Amos. Leave now, or I'll call the authorities." Amos laughed. "You think they'll believe you? We own the police, Abby. And as for you, Cynthia, you've made a grave mistake crossing us." Cynthia's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. I'm not going anywhere with you, she said, her voice firm. You've taken enough from me. You won't take my children. The confrontation was escalating, the tension crackling like a live wire. But just as Amos signaled his men to move, a piercing siren filled the air. Police cars screeched to a halt outside the house, their lights flashing. Emmanuel stepped out of one, holding up a warrant. You underestimated us, Amos, Abby said, a triumphant smile on her lips. Your reign of terror ends tonight. The men were arrested, their crimes laid bare for the world to see. With the family's power dismantled and justice served, Cynthia could finally breathe again. She and her children were safe, and with Abby's support, she began rebuilding her life. But as she held her babies close, she knew this was only the beginning. Have you, or anyone you know, experienced this kind of cruelty from their in-laws? What about the dehumanizing burial rite? Are they still being practiced today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.